All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the Maurya Empire. This wasn't just another kingdom. It was the first true pan-Indian superpower, a moment in history that absolutely changed the game for the entire subcontinent. So let's start with the big, fundamental question that ambitious rulers back then were grappling with. When you've got a landmass packed with different kingdoms, cultures, and languages, how on earth do you bring them all under one single banner? To really grasp the scale of what the Mauryas pulled off, it helps to think of it in modern terms. Don't just picture a military conquest. Picture ancient India's first and most aggressive corporate mega-merger. Okay, so how does something like this even happen? An empire of this size doesn't just pop up out of nowhere. The stage had to be set just right for something this huge to even be possible. And what you had was a perfect storm brewing. First, the kingdom of Magadha had all the resources you could want: rich, fertile soil for food and, crucially, tons of iron ore for weapons. Other ambitious rulers had already started pushing their borders, kind of warming things up, and then, bam, Alexander the Great shows up, completely destabilizes the Northwest, and leaves a giant power vacuum just waiting for someone to step in. But an opportunity like that, it's just an opportunity. You need the right people to actually seize it. And the Mauryan story? It really boils down to two key figures: a leader with incredible ambition and a strategist who was nothing short of a genius. So let's meet the architects of this whole thing. You've got the founder, Chandragupta Maurya. Think of him as the bold, aggressive CEO who saw an opening and launched a hostile takeover. And right beside him was the mastermind, Chanakya, the chief strategist who literally wrote the playbook on how to build and run a state. And let me tell you, these guys did not waste any time. The moment chaos hit after Alexander's invasion, Chandragupta pounced, taking down the ruling Nanda dynasty in 321 BCE. Just over 15 years later, he's defeating one of Alexander's successors, Seleucus Nicator, and securing his western border. Incredibly fast. So think about that. In just a couple of decades, he unifies all of northern India, pushes the empire's borders into modern-day Afghanistan, and even seals a peace treaty with a marriage. But then, and this is what's just wild, he walks away from it all. He gives up the throne to become a Jain monk. An incredible end to his story. All right, so you've built this massive, subcontinent-sized empire. Now what? How in the world do you actually run the thing? Well, that massive headache fell to Chandragupta's son, Bindusara, and you could argue his job was even tougher than the conquering part. He had to hold this whole new, sprawling enterprise together, make sure all the systems worked, and at the same time, keep pushing the empire's borders further south. And the playbook for all of this? It came from Chanakya's masterpiece, the Arthashastra. Now, let's be clear, this was not some philosophical book about justice. No, this was a cold, hard, brutally pragmatic manual for gaining and holding onto power. It laid out this idea of the state as a living body with 7 vital organs, from the king as the head to allies as the ears. It was a revolutionary and scientific way to look at government. Now, here's where things get really tricky for historians. Our two main sources from the time, they paint completely different pictures of what life was actually like. On one hand, Chanakya's book goes into detail about slavery and the caste system. But then you read the Greek ambassador, Megasthenes, and he claims there was no slavery at all and that people were organized by their jobs. It's a massive contradiction that reminds us how tough it is to know the past for sure. But here's the thing. Even with those totally different takes on society, the one thing they both agree on is the structure of the state itself. It was a well-oiled, highly centralized machine, exactly like Chanakya drew it up. Power flowed from the king at the top, down to his council, and then out to 4 huge provinces run by royal princes, all managed by this massive bureaucracy that controlled everything. The empire's third ruler, and by far its most famous, was Chandragupta's grandson, Ashoka. And he is going to take this empire in a completely new, totally radical direction. But not before one of the bloodiest and most brutal wars in ancient history. Yeah, in his early years, they called him Chandash Ashoka. That means Ashoka the Fierce. And he earned that name. He was a ruthless expansionist. But one single event would change him so profoundly that he would basically become a different person, adopting a whole new title and philosophy. And that event was the Kalinga War. Around 261 BCE, Ashoka's army just annihilated the kingdom of Kalinga. The sheer scale of the slaughter, we're talking over 100,000 people killed with countless more affected. It just broke him. The horror of that war triggered a complete psychological transformation. He renounced violent conquests and adopted this new philosophy of paternal kingship. He famously declared, "All men are my children." He went from being a conqueror to seeing himself as a father to his people. So he started to rule not with the sword, but with an idea. He called it Dhamma. And it's important to understand, this wasn't a religion he was forcing on people. It was more like a universal moral code emphasizing nonviolence, tolerance for everyone's beliefs, and basic social welfare. And this incredible pivot, the shift from pure power to a moral mission, this would become the Mauryan Empire's true legacy, something that would last way, way longer than any political border. I mean, just think about his impact. Through his patronage, he essentially took Buddhism from this small local sect and launched it onto the world stage. He sent missionaries everywhere. He even sent his own son and daughter to Sri Lanka. And on top of all that, he started an architectural revolution. And this shift from wood to stone, you can't overstate how huge this was. Before Ashoka, big important structures in India were mostly made of wood. They just didn't last. By making stone the go-to material, he wasn't just building monuments, he was literally carving his legacy into eternity. And this is the really cool part. This history isn't dead and buried. It's alive right now. That famous lion capital that Ashoka put up at Sarnath, that is the official national emblem of India today. The symbols of this empire are still with us. But, even the greatest empires don't last forever. After Ashoka died, the empire's biggest strength, that powerful centralized system, it actually became its greatest weakness. See, the whole thing needed a strong, visionary leader to work. With a string of weaker successors, the massive empire just became impossible to manage, and it started to crumble. About 50 years later, the last Mauryan ruler was killed by his own general, and that was the end. Which really leaves us with a fascinating thought, doesn't it? The physical borders of the Mauryan Empire vanished nearly 2,000 years ago, but their ideas, their blueprint for a state, and especially Ashoka's radical vision of moral leadership, those ideas lived on, inspiring rulers for centuries. So it makes you wonder, what is it that makes an empire's ideas outlast the empire itself?